Ladies and gentlemen, please be upstanding for the President of the NATO Parliamentary Assembly.
Good morning, everybody. I declare the spring session of the NATO Parliamentary Assembly open. Prime Minister, Madam Deputy Speaker, Excellencies, colleagues, it's a great honor for me to speak to you today as we meet in our NATO family, representatives of people of the free world. We assemble at a pivotal moment in history. After more than 800 days of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, it's easy to lose sense of urgency, to forget what is at stake. Our Ukrainian friends are here to remind us that every day and every night, innocent men, women, and children in Ukraine die because of Russia's war. To remind us that Ukrainians are dying not only because they wanted what we want: freedom, democracy, and prosperity. to remind us that if Russia wins in Ukraine, we are next on Putin's list. And finally, to remind us of who we are, a unique community of democracies, of democratic nations, determined to defend peace and democracy against aggression and oppression. We must stand up for these values. We must stand up with Ukraine until victory and beyond. This is the test of our times, of our generation. Colleagues, how should we raise these challenges? Firstly, by building a renewed momentum in military assistance to Ukraine. They need our help, not in 2 years, not in 2 months, not even in 2 weeks. They need it now. Ukraine can only defend itself if it can attack Russia's supply lines and Russia's bases of operations. It's time to recognize this reality and let Ukraine do what it must. Air defenses for Ukraine needs to be a major priority. We have to ensure Ukrainian airspace is protected. And let's be crystal clear, NATO will be significantly weakened, losing credibility if we continue assisting with half measures. Colleagues, whoever still doubts that this is the right thing to do, look at Russia is doing in our countries. It's attacking our democracies, not with tanks, not yet. But every day we are exposed to widespread disinformation campaigns, political corruption, tens of thousands of cyber attacks, targeted killings, acts of sabotage, acts of terrorism, arson, explosions, all on NATO territory. This past week, Russia has stepped up in its unacceptable provocations, going as far as putting in doubt the borders of NATO. We stand in full solidarity with our allies, Estonia, Finland, Lithuania, in the face of these reckless actions. Russia is not working alone. Putin has created a club of autocracies with dictator friends in Minsk, Beijing, Tehran, and Pyongyang. Every day, we see more evidence of their organized, sophisticated campaign to divide our population, to undermine trust, and to ultimately to destroy democracy. This year is a year of great dangers. Autocratic regimes, aided by China and Russia, are fueling deadly conflicts in the Middle East and in Africa. Half of the world is holding elections, soon here in Bulgaria, for the European Parliament, in the UK, in the United States, in our partners Georgia and Moldova, where democracy is fragile. Autocracies see this election as targets of attack, as targets for attack, to make us weaker. So our second response is defending democracy. We must recognize this threat. Our Assembly says it very clear. Security today is not just tanks and jets. It's also about the strength of our societies, of our democracies, of our institutions. We must make clear to our adversaries that our determination to defend democracy is greater than their determination to destroy it. We are bound by the commitment written in NATO treaty to safeguard the freedom, common heritage, and civilization of our people, founded on the principles of democracy, individual liberty, and the rule of law. As NATO celebrates its 75th anniversary, we need more than just words. We need actions. It's time to establish a democratic resilience center at NATO headquarters. We must get this done. I count on your support. Friends, our third response to historic challenges is strengthening our defense and deterrence. In just 43 days, NATO leaders will meet in Washington for a critical summit. They must demonstrate absolute unity and determination. They must fulfill pledges and send a clear signal how prepared NATO is to defend every inch of its territory. NATO has to make sure that with the new defense plans are executable, to ensure all allies spend at least 2% of GDP on defense and command countries who exceed this level. We have to strengthen allied defense industries and cooperation between them. The Washington summit must shape NATO for the next generation, stronger than ever. Summarizing today our Assembly vision for NATO future is very simple. NATO must be an alliance, defending our democracies, determined to defend every inch of allied territory at all times, under Article 5, committed to standing with Ukraine until victory and beyond. I look forward to presenting it to allied heads of state and government in Washington. Colleagues, we also need to support those who want to join NATO, who want to join our unique community of democracies. Bulgaria, our host, commemorates 20 years of steadfast membership. Thank you, Prime Minister, Madam Deputy Speaker, dear Daniel, for Bulgaria's many strong contribution to NATO and to our Assembly, and in particular for its key role for security in the Black Sea areas, as well in the Western Balkans and beyond. Today, our Swedish friends participate for the first time in our session as full members. Let me welcome you on behalf of all your new allies. Your membership makes NATO and our Assembly stronger. But we must welcome Ukraine next. Ukraine's place is in NATO. The Washington summit must recognize that Ukraine's path to membership is irreversible, and acknowledge the significant progress Ukraine has made on this path. Excellencies, colleagues, as NATO parliamentarians, we represent the 1 billion citizens of the Alliance. At the dawn of a new era of strategic competition, we are determined to play our part in shaping the Alliance for the next generations. An alliance firmly grounded in our shared democratic values. Because this is what makes us unique. This is what makes us strong. One for all and all for one. Thank you. Excellencies, dear colleagues, it's now my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Dimitar GLAVCHEV, Prime Minister of Bulgaria. Prime Minister, I want to congratulate Bulgaria on the 20th anniversary of its accession to NATO. It's timely that our Assembly's meeting in Sofia coincides with this historic anniversary. Mr. Prime Minister, you have the floor.
Благодаря ви, уважаеми господин председател.
Thank you, Mr. President of the NATO Parliamentary Assembly, Madam Deputy Speaker of the National Assembly, ladies and gentlemen. It is a pleasure and an honor for me to address the spring session of the Parliamentary Assembly of NATO, as well as to welcome the Secretary General, Mr. Jens Stoltenberg. This is the year when we're celebrating the 75th anniversary of the active participation to which Bulgaria is aspiring in its 20-year history. This is very important because this is the first case when parliamentarians from Sweden are participating as full members of our alliance. I would like to welcome them. And as a person with parliamentary experience, I would like to express my certainty that they will contribute to the alliance's mission. For the past more than 7 decades, the members of the alliance grew from 12 to 32. This shows that democratic societies perceive NATO as a guarantee for prosperity. The open door policy has contributed to the consolidation of the Euro-Atlantic security zone. There's no doubt that the NATO enlargement process over the past 30 years took place at the background of fundamental changes in the architecture after the post-war period, being an integral part of the adaptation of the alliance to the new strategic realities. I would like to point out that for Bulgaria, the accession to the alliance of free democratic states that are ready to defend their future is irreversible. The NATO membership provided the strongest guarantees. It was a civilizational choice. It served as motivation for several generations of Bulgarians. It was a strong impetus and incentive for the endorsing of the democratic values, and it contributed to the development of peace and prosperity in the state. The drastically deteriorated security environment after the Russian aggression against Ukraine showed that our fundamental rights can be questioned, and even worse, they can be threatened. NATO remains the invariable guarantor of our security and prosperity. We need to remain united and strongly involved in our support for Ukraine, as well as to invest a lot in deterrence and defense capabilities. NATO has proven in the past years its ability to adapt to the growing challenges before security. I'm convinced that we shall continue to follow this course of high ambitions, especially at the summit in Washington, where Bulgaria anticipates important outcomes. Decisions will be made that will demonstrate NATO's role as a guarantor of security and its ability to defend every inch of Allied territory. Ukraine should occupy its central space with a predictable mechanism for assisting Ukraine's security, which has adequate financial guarantees as well. The interoperability of the Ukrainian armed forces will secure a bridge to NATO. We expect that special attention will be paid to the Black Sea regions, to the Western Balkans, in view of their strategic importance for Atlantic security. These issues should be high on the agenda of the NATO summit. Ladies and gentlemen, Ukraine turned into a defender of entire Europe through tragic circumstances. Since 2022, Ukraine is bravely defending its freedom and sovereignty. This is why the support for Ukraine, the restoring of the sovereignty and the territorial integrity of the country are essential for a lasting peace in Europe. We need to continue our unswerving support for Ukraine and its people. The role of national parliaments is essential for guaranteeing our long-term and sustainable support. Bulgaria is firmly committed to support for Ukraine for as long as it takes. Through 7 decisions of the National Assembly, we provided a broad range of political, military and humanitarian assistance. There is no other region in NATO and in the European Union that has been so affected by the war of Russia as the Black Sea region. The need to apply a strategic approach to the Black Sea was one of the big conclusions of the Crimean platform, which took place in Sofia this year. Bulgaria defends this approach to the Black Sea region, which will give meaning to its strategic importance. We need NATO presence in the region. The war against Ukraine is an attempt of Russia to broaden its influence in the Balkans and in the southern Caucasus recently. The idea is to erode European security from different standpoints. NATO should send a clear message against all kinds of activities against vulnerable partners from the Western Balkans and the broad Black Sea regions. The alliance and its member states should continue their adaptation to the realities and security by demonstrating reserve and deterrence and defense, especially along the eastern flank and in the Black Sea region. Guaranteeing the necessary resources is of key importance for these plans. The malicious use of new technologies, misinformation, disinformation threaten more and more our democratic values. It is essential to consolidate our capabilities to oppose these threats through concerted efforts of everybody concerned. The participation in allied initiatives strengthens our resilience and guarantees a strong response to these challenges. In this connection, the idea in the strategic concept of the alliance is acquiring ever-increasing importance in the constant threats against our democratic systems. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to conclude by declaring that it is a real achievement of NATO that it preserved peace for 75 years by adapting to a constantly changing world. The alliance contributed essentially to establishing strong links among the allies. Now more than ever, we need to demonstrate our unity and our resolve to cope effectively with the present and future threats. NATO is not created as an opponent. Its task is to defend our values. We shall celebrate the 70th anniversary of the link between NATO and the allied nations through its parliamentarians. Let us enjoy being and let us celebrate our membership and let us cooperate more closely and to intensify our solidarity. We all know that together we stand stronger. Thank you.
Prime Minister, thank you for your remarks and for coming to speak us today. It's now my pleasure to welcome Ms. Rositsa KIROVA, Vice President of the National Assembly of Bulgaria. Madam Vice President, you need to have the floor.
Mr. President of the Parliamentary Assembly, Prime Minister of the Republic of Bulgaria, Minister of Defense, ladies and gentlemen, members of Parliament, Excellencies, dear guests. The forum I have the honor to address today is taking place in a year when we mark several remarkable anniversaries. First of all, we pay homage to NATO's 75th anniversary. In the year of Jubilees 2024, 13 states from Central and Eastern Europe are celebrating their accession to the most powerful and successful defense alliance. Among these countries is Bulgaria too. The organization of the transatlantic unity has guaranteed peace and stability of the 32 member states and of more than 1 billion citizens on this planet for 75 years already. Over the past 20 years, Bulgaria has been part of this powerful defense alliance. Today, Bulgaria hosts the National Assembly of the Parliamentary Assembly of NATO, and this is taking place at a time when the alliance and the Black Sea, the eastern flank of the alliance and the Black Sea region hold the security of the whole world in their hands. The motto of the that united we stand strong has been the motto of the Bulgarian state for more than 13 years. And we are certain that today our place is among the countries of shared values. We are certain that the star of NATO shows us the spiritual compass of contemporary values. To us, NATO is a geopolitical trend of our development. It is a deeply conscious and well thought out civilizational choice. Ladies and gentlemen, the time we live in today does not allow us to mark the anniversaries in the appropriate manner. We are facing a dramatically deteriorated security environment. The risks for security are growing by the day. The war in Ukraine demonstrated how fragile freedom is when you're not part of a strong defense union. This war brought the world to a new security environment, as an environment full of risks. Freedom, peace and stability cannot be taken for granted any longer. They must be defended every day, all the time. And in order to deal with the challenges and threats in a radically changing world, we all have to demonstrate the unity within the alliance. Our new ability to adapt and even stronger determination. In the face of war and aggression, now more than ever, we have to invest in strengthening our deterrence and defense capabilities. In the third year now, Ukraine heroically has been defending its freedom and sovereignty against the face of the Russian aggressor. And let me put it crystal clear. Ukraine is defending not only herself, Ukraine is defending Europe and our shared democratic values, our principles. That is why we have to continue our firm and unwavering long-term political and practical support to Ukraine and the Ukrainian people. Allow me to clearly reconfirm before you all the position of my country. Bulgaria helps Ukraine against the Russian military aggression, and this is a priority for the country. The Bulgarian parliament adopted 7 resolutions to extend a wide range of assistance to Ukraine. And I personally saw, when I visited this country in March, I saw that time there is measured in human lives and destinies. Today we have to realistically look upon the world and admit that we live in difficult times. Every day reminds us that freedom, peace and stability are not to be taken for granted. They have to be defended all the time. And these are the values we are defending today and which we have to stand for our own sake and for the sake of the future generations. This can only be achieved if we are united and resolute in our strive to achieve long-standing peace. It is necessary to always look for mechanisms to achieve understanding and good neighborly relations, compassion with the war-stricken regions, the peaceful civilians, particularly vulnerable groups. Because in the conditions of dramatically deteriorated security environment, the victims and risks for peaceful civilians are growing by the day. For us, this is a cause that shows that there are threats to principles of equal dignity and rights for all people, their ability to coexist. Normal existence, social adaptation and survival are very difficult for the most vulnerable groups, namely women, children and the elderly. More than 5 million Ukrainian citizens were displaced and left their homes. They were welcomed by our European family. These are people whose homes were bombed, whose families were divided, whose elderly parents and young children need our urgent support. The Bulgarian people opened the doors of their homes and received more than 178,000 Ukrainian refugees. Hundreds of volunteers took part in various charitable actions in support of the refugees and the people in need in the Ukraine. The Bulgarian state made all the necessary steps to provide normal conditions and social adaptations for the citizens of Ukraine fleeing the war. That's why, let me reiterate, Bulgaria remains strongly committed to continue support for Ukraine. I understand that challenges to global security today are large-scale and multifaceted. As a Bulgarian politician, however, I feel obliged to draw your attention to the need of a stronger focus on the regions of the Black Sea and the Western Balkans. They are strategically important for the Euro-Atlantic security. The challenges in the area of security here cannot be overcome without new and intensified forms of cooperation. Bulgaria makes efforts and honors its commitment to strengthen the deterrent and defense capabilities of the eastern flank. We progressively increase the defense expenditure in this year, and we will reach and exceed the minimum goal of 2% of the GDP. As NATO Eastern Flank ally, Bulgaria and the region need the support of the member states and the partner countries in terms of investment, particularly in transport, communication and energy infrastructure. These investments will make our region more stable and more secure. Allow me also to stress that the full-scale membership of Bulgaria and Romania in the Schengen zone for free movement of goods and people is absolutely needed, both for the two countries and the EU and NATO, in order to encourage regional investment. This will be of help to the region and to Ukraine now, but it will also be of a decisive significance when the recovery of Ukraine begins. Our hope is that this moment will come as soon as possible. I cannot but mention the growing tensions in the Western Balkans. This is also a huge problem for the security of the this Euro-Atlantic area. The malicious hybrid and cyber activity, misinformation campaigns and confrontational rhetoric against NATO in the Western Balkans should be very clearly opposed, just as any attempt of aggressive action in the region. NATO has made a choice, a conscious choice to become a member of NATO. This is a choice that provides the strongest guarantees for security and contributes to strengthening democratic values and economic stability in our region. Due to our NATO membership, we strengthened the capabilities of Bulgaria's armed forces. We received access to collective defense mechanisms and an equal vote to the decision-making process in security. And when we speak of the Bulgarian armed forces, allow me to mention another remarkable fact. All Bulgarian women take pride in it, namely that for 20 years of NATO membership, Bulgaria reached 17% representation of women in the Bulgarian armed forces. And we rank among the top 4 among the member states in the alliance on this criterion. Ladies and gentlemen, we're about to take part in significant discussions on security-related topics. I wish all participants to find solutions that will help us live in peace, cooperation and understanding. In conclusion, allow me to note that security challenges of such scale and complexity cannot be overcome without new forms of cooperation. I believe that the cooperation within the alliance can be given new meaning, because we see NATO as a long-term strategic path of innovation, new technology, economic development, and a more active exchange of experience and knowledge among the allies who have the same interest and share the same values. Thank you for your attention.
Madam Vice President, thank you for coming and to speak to us today and for your support in hosting the spring session. Each of us will remember the reception that was yesterday, and thank you for your hospitality here in Sofia. Now, let me welcome His Excellency Mr. Jens Stoltenberg, Secretary General of NATO. Mr. Secretary General, dear Jens, later this morning the Assembly will adopt our recommendations for the Washington Summit. Our Assembly's vision for NATO future is simple: an alliance of democracies with a center for democratic resilience at its headquarters, an alliance determined to defend every inch of Allied territory at all times under Article 5, an alliance committed to standing with Ukraine until victory and beyond, an alliance which fairly shares the benefits, burdens and responsibilities, an alliance which welcomes those who share our values and contribute to our shared security. I look forward to presenting this vision to NATO heads of state and government in Washington. But today, we would like to hear your expectations and priorities for the summit. So thank you for joining us. Mr. Secretary General, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Good morning to everyone. Prime Minister, Minister, Excellencies, President SZCZERBA, Michal, it's great to see you again. And it's great to be back in Sofia and to meet with the NATO Parliamentary Assembly. As I've said so many times before, for me it is a privilege to meet with parliamentarians across the alliance and from partner nations, because I know that at the end of the day it is parliaments that decide what really matters for NATO. The budgets, the commitment to our collective defense, and also parliaments represents the democratic institutions that NATO is established to defend. So therefore, I always look forward to this opportunity to engage with you, to say some words about where we are at the NATO headquarters, and then to engage in Q&A sessions with parliamentarians from NATO allies and partner countries. So thank you so much for inviting me. Thank you for having me here today. And let me start by saying that I have attended these conferences, meetings of the NATO Parliamentary Assembly now for 10 years. In all those meetings, Sweden has been a partner nation. But this is now the first time where Sweden is not sitting here as a partner nation, but Sweden is here as a full-fledged member of the alliance. So welcome to Sweden. It's great to see you here. And to be honest, it's great to welcome them as a Secretary General of NATO, but also as a representative from Norway, a neighbor country of Sweden, to have now Sweden as a full-fledged member. What I will do today is that I will try to be not too long, so we have time for the Q&A session, but I will go through the preparations for the NATO summit in July, where we will of course celebrate the 75th anniversary of the strongest, the most enduring, the most successful alliance in history, NATO. I will do that. We will do that in Washington. We will celebrate the 75th anniversary, but we will do that reflecting the reason why NATO is so successful. And the reason why NATO is the most successful alliance in history is partly that we have been able to unite despite our differences, but the main reason why NATO is the most successful alliance in history is that we have been able to change and adapt when the world is changing. And therefore, at this Washington summit, we have to not only be able to celebrate, but we have to be able to demonstrate that NATO is changing, that NATO is responding, that NATO is adapting when the world is changing. And now we live in a more dangerous world, and therefore NATO has to respond to that more demanding and difficult security environment we are facing. And there are three topics, three issues which we will address at the summit, where we have to make important decisions and where we need to ensure that we are responding to a changing world. And I will briefly go through the three of them, and then I'm more than ready to answer questions on those issues, but also on all the other issues I don't mention in the Q&A afterwards. The first issue at the Washington summit, and we are working on that as we speak at the NATO headquarters, is deterrence and defense, which is the core of NATO. Because you have to remember that the main purpose of NATO is not to fight the war. The main purpose of NATO is to prevent war, preserve peace. And we do that by making sure that any potential adversary knows that an attack on one ally will trigger the response from the whole alliance. And by doing that, we have been able to prevent any military attack on any NATO ally for 75 years. So NATO's purpose is peace. NATO's purpose is to prevent war. And we do that by credible deterrence and defense. And when we now have a more aggressive Russia, a Russia which is using force against neighbors of NATO, Ukraine, but also we have seen it against Georgia, we have seen how Russia has forces in Moldova and how they are threatening other countries, then of course we need to do more to strengthen our deterrence and defense. And that's exactly what we are doing. We have agreed new defense plans. And what we have to do in Washington is to demonstrate that we are delivering on those plans. Because plans are important, but plans without the necessary forces doesn't have any value. So therefore we need to ensure that by Washington we actually can demonstrate to the whole world, to all of us, that when we have agreed that we need more forces, higher readiness, new capabilities, that we are actually delivering on that. The good news is that we see that allies are delivering. They are making more forces available for NATO. They are investing in new, modern, high-end military capabilities, and they are increasing the readiness of our forces. And this is not least reflected in the fact that allies are investing more. You may know all these numbers, but I repeat them just so you are 100% aware of them. When we published our latest report on defense spending in February, 18 allies spent 2% or more of GDP on defense. And that is significantly more than just a few years ago. 2 years ago, less than 10 allies spent 2% or more on defense. And if you compare with 2014, when we made the pledge, all NATO allies, to invest 2% of GDP on defense, only 3 allies, Greece, United Kingdom and United States, spent 2% of GDP on defense. So in February, when we had the latest update, 18. Then since February, Sweden has joined, and they spend 2% of GDP. So then you can add one more, that's 19. Then, since then, Norway has announced in the revised budget presented in the beginning of May that they will meet the 2% target. They actually proposed billions extra for defense. So that makes it 20. And then I expect also a couple of other allies. I had a very good conversation with the Prime Minister of Montenegro just a few days ago, and Montenegro also stated that they will be at 2% this year. And there are also some more. So I expect that, I will not give you the final number, but we will at least have 2/3 of allies spending 2% of GDP on defense by the Washington summit. This is very much better than just a few years ago. It demonstrates that we are taking the turns on defense seriously, and it demonstrates also that burden sharing is improving within the alliance. So the first topic at the Washington summit will be that we have to deliver on the defense plans with forces, capabilities, readiness, and also demonstrate burden sharing when it comes to defense spending. Final numbers we will have within a few weeks, but I'm optimistic when it comes to burden sharing and the ability of allies to demonstrate that we are stepping up when it comes to deterrence and defense and defense investments. The second main topic on the summit in Washington will be Ukraine. And we saw the horrific attack on a shopping mall in Kharkiv over the weekend. Many civilians killed, many wounded. And it's yet another example of the brutality of this war and why this war has to end and why Russia has to stop attacking a sovereign independent nation. It is simply unacceptable that Russia continues to attack, invade another sovereign independent nation, and that was demonstrated yet again by the brutal attack against the shopping mall in Kharkiv. NATO allies have provided unprecedented military support to Ukraine. Many partners have also provided support, and I am grateful for that. But when the economic, humanitarian support to Ukraine, but when it comes to the military support, it's almost only NATO allies. 99% of the military support provided to Ukraine is provided by NATO allies. And this military support has enabled the Ukrainians to liberate 50% of the territory that Russia occupied in the beginning of the war. And we have to remember where we started at the beginning of the war. In February 2022, then most experts believed that Russia was going to control Kiev within days and the whole of Ukraine within weeks. That didn't happen. The Ukrainians, I'll just steal your water. Yeah, thank you. You're very generous. Yeah, thank you. The Ukrainians, with the military support from NATO allies, have liberated 50% of the territory. They have been able to sink many of the ships in the Black Sea, the Russian ships in the Black Sea fleet, open a corridor for export of grain and other commodities, and they have been able to inflict heavy losses on the Russian invading forces. These are important gains and victories made by the Ukrainian forces. And we, NATO allies, partners, have enabled that by our support to Ukraine. That's the good news. The problem is that over the last months, we have not delivered to Ukraine what we promised. The United States spent 6 months agreeing a new package of aid. European allies that promised 1 million rounds of ammunition have not delivered anything close to that number of rounds of ammunition to Ukraine. And just last month, in April, NATO defense ministers met with President Zelensky, and he underlined, he addressed the urgent need for more air defense, in particular advanced air defense systems like the Patriot systems or the SAM-T. Except for Germany, that has delivered one additional system of the Patriots, allies have not delivered what they promised on air defense. And of course, these gaps, these delays in military support has had consequences on the ground. It's not a kind of academic, theoretical thing. The fact that they don't get ammunition, they don't get air defense, they don't get the supplies we are promised, has made it very hard for Ukrainians to defend their land. Outgunned, not able to shoot down incoming Russian missiles, outgunned on the battlefield. Of course, it has consequences. And that's also the reason why the situation now on the battlefield is difficult. And we see the consequences with airstrikes, with the missile strikes, and all the other things we see in Ukraine. And that's also the reason why it is an urgent need for allies to step up. And of course, I welcome the recent announcements from several allies. I welcome, of course, the decision by the US Congress to pass a supplemental with 60 billion more for Ukraine. These are important decisions. They will make a difference. Support has started to flow in again, but delays and also the fact that not everything is delivered as promised has caused serious consequences. That's also the reason, one of the reasons why I have suggested that at the summit we agree a bigger NATO role in coordinating and providing security assistance and training for Ukraine. Because I strongly believe that we need a firmer, stronger institutional structure for the support. Ad hoc, short-term, voluntary announcements are good, but in the long term we need more predictable, stronger support for Ukraine. And therefore, I think a bigger NATO role in providing that support is the right thing to agree. We have received a proposal from SACEUR, NATO's Supreme Allied Commander, General Cavoli. Allies are now working on that proposal, and I expect that by the summit in Washington we will agree a stronger NATO role in organizing, providing, planning, delivering supplies to ensure more stable flows of supplies to Ukraine. But to make this really effective, we also need not only a better organization that provides more accountability, transparency, predictability in the delivery of supplies, but we will also need a more long-term financial commitment. And therefore also working on that. I cannot tell you exactly what the conclusion will be, but I hope that allies can agree a multi-year financial pledge because the Ukrainians need more long-term knowledge, more predictability to plan and to invest, to ensure that they have the forces they need to defend against the Russian invaders, but also in the future to deter against future Russian aggression. So what I have suggested for allies and what I hope that we can agree in July is a stronger organization, a stronger NATO role in providing and coordinating training and support, and a multi-year financial pledge. If we get this, then we have a more robust foundation for the continued support for Ukraine. We also have a tool to ensure fair burden sharing when it comes to supplies and support to Ukraine. So I just count on your support for stronger, more predictable support to Ukraine, because that's exactly what Ukraine needs. The third main topic at the Washington summit will be global partnerships, and in particular our Asia-Pacific partners, Australia, New Zealand, Japan and South Korea. And that reflects that security is not regional, security is global. NATO will remain a regional alliance. NATO is an alliance of North America and Europe. But this North Atlantic region faces global threats. And the war in Ukraine demonstrates that very clearly. Because you have to remember who are actually supporting Russia's war in Ukraine. The most important suppliers and supporters of Russia's war in Ukraine, in Europe, they are countries in Asia. China is propping up the Russian war economy, delivering dual-use equipment, being the most important trading partner. China has not condemned at any stage Russia's invasion of Ukraine. China has stepped up economic trade relations with Russia, and they are providing 90% of the microelectronics that Russia receives comes from China. And these microprocessors, microelectronic, are the equipment that Russia uses to build missiles, battle tanks, planes, which they then use to conduct a brutal war against Ukraine. So without this economic support from China, Russia would not have been able to conduct the war in the way they do against Ukraine. In return, Russia is mortgaging its future to Beijing. Then the other supplier is Iran, supplying drones, also helped Russia to build a new drone factory in Tatarstan in Russia, and North Korea providing more than 1 million shells, artillery shells from North Korea to Russia. In return, Russia is sharing technology which enables Iran and North Korea to develop their missile and nuclear programs. So what we see in Europe, in Ukraine, is how Asia matters for the war in Ukraine. And it reminds us of that what happens in Europe matters for Asia, and what happens in Asia matters for Europe, and that China and Russia, authoritarian powers, Iran, North Korea, are more and more aligned and therefore we need to not expand NATO to the Asia-Pacific. NATO will remain Europe and North America, but to work with our partners in the Asia-Pacific, and therefore I welcome that the leaders of the Asia-Pacific will be at we have invited them to attend the summit in Washington. That will be for the third time, reflecting that we are expanding our cooperation with these countries because we share the same values. We believe in democratic, open societies, but we also strongly believe in the need to stand together in upholding those values. So these are the three main topics for the Washington summit. Let me also mention that when we discuss partnerships, of course we discuss partnerships beyond the Asia-Pacific. One of the topics will be also our partners in the South. We have just received a report from an expert group that I established some months ago on the challenges but also opportunities in the South, Africa, Middle East, and how NATO can work and do more on those challenges and utilize those opportunities. This is about, for instance, what we do in Iraq to help to fight terrorism, to enable the Iraqi security forces to ensure that ISIS does not return. We have partnerships in Tunisia, Mauritania, we have partners in the Gulf region. So I also look forward to the discussion and to address how we can do more in our southern neighborhood and with our partners more in general. We have the Balkans, we have other regions where of course partnerships are important for what NATO does. But the three main topics, as I said, will be defense and defense, Ukraine, a robust, predictable framework for our support, and partnerships, global partnerships in the South, in Europe, but also, not least, our Asia-Pacific partners, addressing the fact that authoritarian powers are more and more aligned. So I will end by saying that we live in a more dangerous world, but NATO has become stronger. We live in a world with a full-fledged war in Europe, with a new war in the Middle East, with more global rivalry with China, North Korea, Iran, Russia being more aligned, but also then the need for NATO allies to be more aligned with our partners around the world. No one can tell with certainty what the next crisis, the next threat will be against NATO allies, but what we can say with certainty is that whatever that crisis is, we will be able to handle, to ensure that our countries are safe as long as we stand together, because as you all know, together we represent 50% of the world's economic might and 50% of the world's military might. So as long as we stand together, North America and Europe, we are safe in a more unpredictable world. Thank you so much. I look forward to the comments and the questions. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you once again for taking the time to be with us here in Sofia. These exchanges with you embody the necessary dialogue between NATO and NATO Parliamentary Assembly. It's very important to have this dialogue with the democratically elected legislators of allied countries. As a long-time successful politician yourself, you have honored that great democratic tradition. Over the years, you have attended many of our sessions and hosted us in the North Atlantic Council, not simply to speak to our members, but also to engage with them. And our exchanges have always been extremely valuable. These moments have been a highlight of our Assembly's work and are absolutely essential for us to fulfill our mandate to promote a common feeling of Atlantic solidarity, to strengthen national parliamentary oversight, to increase public knowledge of the alliance, and to further NATO's aim and democratic values. Just as importantly, Jens, you have been the right leader of the alliance, of this alliance, at the most difficult moment since its founding. Russia's war against Ukraine has put NATO to its greatest test. You have ensured that NATO stands with Ukraine. You have tirelessly pushed allies to do more, and you have made it clear that Ukraine's future is in NATO. Thanks to you, this alliance has emerged from this test stronger, larger, more focused on its core mission and more united than ever. Under your leadership, NATO has adopted a new strategic concept which recognizes the threats that Russia and other autocracies pose to our security, to democracy, and to the rules-based international order. Under your leadership, NATO is also conducting the most in-depth transformation of its collective defense since the end of the Cold War. During your term, NATO has welcomed Finland and Sweden as new members. You have also made sure that we work more closely with each other and with our closest democratic partners to defend the rules-based international order. There is, of course, still time to add a few other achievements to this very long list before your term comes to an end. If we could suggest one, we remain 100% convinced that NATO needs a Center for Democratic Resilience at its headquarters. Dear Jens, for all of these reasons and for your friendship and support, I would like to present to you the award for outstanding service. This award for outstanding service to the Alliance on behalf of this Assembly and all of its members. Let me give it to you on behalf of us all. So, dear colleagues, we now come to questions. I must warn you that we already have a large number of questions. It is highly unlikely that we will be able to go through all of them. I will set a 1.5 minute time limit for questions. I encourage you to keep your question as short as possible so that more delegates can participate. I will follow our usual procedure. I will announce those called to ask questions in groups of 3. I ask Mr. Nicu Falcoi from Romania.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Secretary General, there has been significant public discourse in recent months about the necessity of increasing NATO assistance to Ukraine, particularly through training mission within the country. Given the positive expression from some member countries and NATO's extensive experience in providing training programs, it is crucial that the alliance take a clear position. Are you in favor of NATO training mission being deployed in Ukraine?
Now, Marcos Peristrello and Michael Turner.
Thank you, Chair, Mr. President. Dear Secretary General, my question is concerning the southern flank. If you could comment on the new military agreements that Russia is making with African countries. Thank you.
Mr. President, Mike Turner.
Mr. Secretary General, thank you for your leadership and your commitment in working with legislators. You even personally came and met with members in Congress as we were deliberating on the additional funding for Ukraine. Thank you for your efforts to do that. You have identified, obviously, the importance of the enormous amount of Ukraine support that we have given as an alliance, and certainly Ukraine's will and dedication, which has been inspirational for us all. But you also have identified the gaps. We have been slow to give advanced weapons, air defense systems, fighter jets, long-range fires. Our production is a problem. There are time gaps and delays, and as you've indicated, these are having consequences for Ukraine. Recently, on a bipartisan group of the U.S. delegation to the NATO Parliamentary Assembly sent a letter to President Biden encouraging him to expand the authorities given to Ukraine. Currently, they're fighting with one arm tied behind their back. They're limited in their ability to attack inside Russia. And as you know, that's a math problem for us. As Russia continues to produce weapon systems, no matter how many air defense systems that we give to them, will never keep up with their production. The ability for them to take the fight to Russia, to diminish their production capability, could change the battleground, also the ability to provide intelligence so they could have better targeting and be more effective in those attacks. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your questions. First, on the training inside Ukraine. We have no plans to start training inside Ukraine, not least because our aim is to do more training outside Ukraine. And we have proven that we are able to do that in an effective way across the alliance. And I strongly believe that if we have a stronger NATO framework around the support, we will be able to scale up and also coordinate even better and plan even better the training that we are providing to Ukraine and to help them build their forces. I think we just need to reflect a moment on NATO's tasks in this war. In one way, we have two tasks. And we define that also very clearly in the morning of the invasion on the 24th of February. The first is to support Ukraine, as we do, in so many ways, with unprecedented support, and we need to do more, to help Ukraine defend themselves. The other task is to prevent this war from escalating beyond Ukraine, to become a full-fledged war between Russia and Russia and NATO in Europe. And therefore we have made it clear that they will not be party to the conflict, will not have NATO combat troops on the ground, and therefore we have worked on how to increase training outside Ukraine, but also how to deliver weapons and ammunition into Ukraine, hand them over to Ukrainian forces. That's the training issue. Then on the southern flank, so first of all, we had this expert group. We received the report. We are now going through all the proposals from the expert group. The expert group was actually chaired by a Portuguese professor. And I welcome her, her efforts, and the efforts of the whole group. I think what we see is that both Russia and China are increasing their presence in different ways in Africa. That just highlights the importance of us countering disinformation, because I think the increased presence of these countries is partly based on a lot of disinformation about NATO and NATO's role, and including the war in Ukraine. Russia and China are sharing the same narrative that, for instance, the war in Ukraine was caused by NATO. The war in Ukraine was not caused by NATO. Ukraine is a sovereign, independent nation attacked by Russia, and Ukraine has the right to choose its own path, including what kind of security arrangements it wants to be part of. It's about countering disinformation, including across Africa, but it's also about being present when we are invited. Several African countries want more NATO presence, not combat troops, but capacity building, training, partnership activities, help them to build intelligence services, border forces, countering terrorism. And the reality is that NATO could do much more. Also, when we are invited by these countries, and they actually want us to do more, but we don't do more because NATO allies have not been willing to allocate resources. Because to do more with countries in the southern neighborhood, we need the resources to do so, and so far there has been limited willingness from NATO allies to allocate the resources. So I think that an important part is that we actually agreed to step up also the resources we are allocating to work more closely with our partners in the southern neighborhood. Then to you and Mike Turner, first of all, thank you for what you do and what you have done for so many years in ensuring strong bipartisan support for the transatlantic alliance in general and for Ukraine in particular in the US Congress. And I know that you worked hard to ensure the decision we then got some weeks ago in the US Congress for the supplemental for Ukraine. And that is extremely important. This is substantial. It means significantly more support. And we are grateful for what you did to make that decision possible. It's for allies to decide on what conditions they deliver weapons to Ukraine. It's not a NATO decision, it's a decision made by individual allies. But I have said that the time has come to consider whether it will be right to lift some of the restrictions which have been imposed. Because we see now that especially in Kharkiv region, the front line and the borderline is more or less the same. And of course, if you then cannot attack military targets on Russian territory, then it ties one hand of the Ukrainians on their back and makes it very hard for them to conduct defense. Because they are attacked from Russian territory with missiles, with airstrikes, with artillery, and it's hard for them to respond because there are restrictions on some of the weapons they could use. And we have to remember what this is. This is self-defense. The Russian invasion of Ukraine is a war of aggression, blatantly violating international law, attacking another democratic sovereign nation. That is violation of international law. But as clear as this is a violation, it is clear that Ukraine has the right to defend themselves. Self-defense is enshrined in the UN Charter. Self-defense is enshrined in international law. And self-defense includes the right to also attack legitimate military targets inside Russia. That's self-defense, and they have the right to self-defense, and we should help them to uphold the right of self-defense. And therefore, some allies have lifted restrictions, enabling the Ukrainians to better defend themselves, and I think the time has come to consider also lifting other restrictions to help self-defense within the limitations of international law. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary General. The next group of delegates, Julie Jerovich from Canada, Daniel Mitov from Bulgaria, and Alex Shalbrook from the United Kingdom.
Secretary General, I want to start off by thanking you for your extraordinary leadership. Not only has NATO, but the world has benefited from your leadership. We're stronger and more united because of it, so heartfelt thanks to you. Secondly, as you know, Secretary General, Canada has recently announced significant increase in defense and investment spending that sets us on the path to 2%. We know we need to do more, and I want to reassure you and everyone here that we will be there and do more than our part. Getting to my question, with climate change, we are seeing the melting of the Arctic. Not only Russia, but also China is increasingly focused on this area. The high north and Arctic countries, including Canada, are very worried about the new threats the new security and sovereignty threats that the changing physical and geopolitical landscape has created. So my question is, how is NATO thinking about the northern flank, and how is it incorporating it into its overall deterrence and defense posture? Thank you.
Well done. Well done.
Daniel. Thank you very much, Mr. President. Mr. Secretary General, thank you very much for being here with us. It's an honor for us to welcome you in Sofia, and of course, I'd like to commend your leadership in these years and your personal contribution to keeping the alliance united in very turbulent and challenging geopolitical times. As we all know, and we render ourselves account on the fact that information and actually disinformation war on the part of Russia is a dimension of a real war which Russia wages against the West, against NATO, against all of us. Are we prepared to collectively recognize the level of that danger and to scale up the collective action against information wars on the part of Russia and China, and face the disinformation challenges towards us by taking it to a upper level? I would mention even triggering Article 5 in that dimension. Thank you. Alec.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. Secretary General. Building on Julie Derevitz's question from Canada about the High North, obviously we all want to see the High North remain an area of low tension. So what do you believe, Mr. Secretary General, that we perhaps need to look at what is included in the 2% spend to ensure we have the capabilities to have a credible deterrent in the emerging importance of the High North due to climate change?
Okay, let me first start with Romania and Daniel, and then I come back to the High North, which is a question from Canada and the United Kingdom. So this information is extremely important. I think that we just need to be aware of that in times with social media, with troll fabrics and a lot of efforts by not least Russia but also by other authoritarian regimes to try to create confusion, false narratives, that we need to counter those false narratives. And this is partly what we do at the NATO level, that we share information, we provide the facts, that we are very much aware, and Farah, my spokesperson, is actually working hard on that every day with her team and everyone at the NATO headquarters. But at the end of the day, I think it's extremely important to understand that countering this information has to be something which is a top priority for individual national allies, or the individual allies, because it has to be done in your native language. You know better exactly what kind of language, what kind of message that fits into that domestic context. So NATO can help, NATO can support, but it's very much a national responsibility to ensure that we counter it in the right way in the different NATO allied countries. We can learn from each other, we can exercise together, we can share best practices, but the conduct of the counter disinformation has to be very much a national responsibility that we do together. Then let me add that I think that perhaps, so first of all, I believe that in the long run, truth will prevail. Second, I strongly believe that the best tool we have in countering disinformation is to ensure that we have a free and independent press, media. Because having journalists that are independent, that are asking the difficult questions, that are checking their sources, that may be sometimes a bit annoying for people with power, and I have been in that position myself, but it is a good thing. And free and independent press is the best way to ensure that disinformation doesn't prevail. So make sure that you do what is needed to have free, independent, critical press towards us, but also then towards everyone else that try to manipulate the media landscape. Then to Canada and the United Kingdom. So climate change matters for our security in many ways. It fuels conflicts, it's changing the environment where our missions and military operations are taking place, and we need to also reduce emissions from military operations. But you mentioned one aspect of climate change, and that is the high north. And of course, climate change is changing the conditions in which we have military operations in the high north. Both we, but also, of course, Russia and others. The ice is melting, the temperature is increasing much faster in the high north than in the rest of the world, so we have already seen dramatic effects. The ice shelf in the Arctic has really also been reduced over the last years, and this will mean that it will be easier to move ships. We can have more commercial activities. The north-east passage is more and more open for traffic, and this has impacts on economic activity and military activity up in the high north. It also means that, this happens in combination with that Russia has increased their presence. They have reopened old bases in the high north. They have more exercises, more military presence in the Russian high north. NATO is stepping up. And the reality is that when we, for instance, agree capability targets, which we do in NATO, thousands of different capability targets for each and every ally, we take also into account the need for presence in the high north. Then, of course, many of the capability targets are not earmarked for the high north. But, for instance, when Canada is now buying F-35s, or the United Kingdom is investing more in both advanced maritime patrol aircraft, but also in the British Navy, these are capabilities that can operate in the high north. And it matters for our presence. And I visited Canada as the first Secretary General ever to visit the high north of Canada, Cambridge Bay. And I visited NORAD, and I saw NORAD facilities, which is this integrated US-Canada air and missile defense early warning system. This is of course important for Canada and the United States, but this is important for the whole of NATO. So this is NATO in the high north. So therefore, if anything, it just highlights the importance of investments, that we invest in capabilities that can operate in cold and harsh climate. And the good news is that that's exactly what NATO allies are doing. And we have to remember that also Canada, US, Iceland, Norway, Sweden, Finland, Denmark, was that 7? I think so, yeah. 7 out of the 8 Arctic countries are NATO countries. So when we do things together, exercise together, plan together, then we are able to also face the challenges together in the high north.
Thanks a lot, Mr. Secretary General. And the next group of 3 are Hans Wallmark from Sweden, Johan Wadefull from Germany, and Lorenzo Cesa from Italy. Hans, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I'm, as a Swede, so glad to say we are NATO. Thank you. Thank you, Jens, for your leadership. As the newest kid at the block, let me say something about 3 things. Article 3. It's important that you have your own abilities, and therefore I'm very happy to say that Sweden has 2% of GDP in defense spending this year. We have an agreement among all 8 parties in the Swedish parliament to go up to 2.6 to 2028. Article 5, it's very important that we implement now the defense plans, not only with paper and ideas, but with content and substance and capabilities. And thirdly, 360 degrees perspective. It's important to understand that the seas are linked to each other. Mediterranean, Black Sea, the Baltic Sea, High North Arctic, and vice versa. And then it's also important that we have this kind of long-term budget commitments. As a country, Sweden have done that. We have now a 3 years budget frame for Ukraine, that we do that also inside NATO and the European Union. Last but not least, in the Washington summit, you're going to discuss also this Center of Excellence of Democratic Resilience. Please, can you say something about that? And can that be achieved during the Washington summit, which must be a success? Because if it's not a success for us in NATO, it's going to be a success for Russia. Thank you.
Mr. Secretary General, can I also thank you for your extraordinary service for the Alliance. Thank you for staying with us, for not leaving your job, though there were easier and perhaps better paid alternatives in your home country. I have 2 questions. The first is, we heard from the Hungarian Prime Minister that he, for his country, was seeking to redefine the terms of NATO membership of Hungary. I would like to quote him: "Our lawyers and officers are working to define how Hungary can exist as a NATO member without taking part in NATO operations outside NATO territory." End of quote. How is that compatible with the obligations out of Article 5 in your interpretation? And the second is how are the concrete prospects for Ukraine to join NATO? Could the old model of Western Germany as a divided country becoming member of NATO in earlier times also be a model for Ukraine in this time? Thank you.
Lorenzo.
First of all, I would like to express the thanks of the Italian delegation to the Secretary General for his extraordinary commitment and achievements. And now coming to my question. In Rome, about a month ago, we held a meeting of the Special Group for the Mediterranean, and the meeting was attended by significant number of countries, not only from the Mediterranean region, but also from the Gulf region and Africa. I carefully read the document that was drafted by the experts, and the situation in the Mediterranean is very clear. There are Russian and Chinese ships in the Mediterranean. Russians are present in the Sahel through the Wagner Group, and we also know that there are Russian troops in Libya. We're aware that Russian ships are in Tunisia, and this is a very recent situation. And we know that Russia is present in various parts of Africa, and this is due to a very clear political intent. So what is NATO's approach to the situation along its southern flank in order to preempt any serious incident which could occur in that area?
Thank you so much. Also first to Sweden and to Hans. Also, the Center of Excellence for Democratic Resilience is an issue we have discussed several times before. I'm very much aware of this Assembly's strong support for this idea. And as you all know, NATO is based on some core values: democracy, individual liberty, the rule of law, and democracy is at the heart of this alliance. And I think also that NATO provides a platform for allies to raise concerns and to discuss this in this body, also the NATO Parliamentary Assembly body, but also in ministerial meetings and in other NATO formats, to have an open and frank discussions about concerns that allies may have about to which extent all NATO allies live up to those principles. When it comes to the specific proposal of a Center for Democratic Resilience, the only way to establish that is to have consensus from all NATO allies. We don't have consensus on that proposal, so therefore we need to also look into what other ways we can ensure that democracy, resilience, democratic resilience is on the NATO agenda. And that's partly by using the existing platforms to discuss democracy, to discuss democratic resilience. You can do it here, you can do it in every NATO meeting. So there are institutions, there are platforms to raise those issues, even if there is no agreement on a specific center on democratic resilience. And second, we have this Building Integrity program, which is a voluntary program, but which is designed to actually strengthen democratic institutions, and that I encourage also allies to use that program, regardless of whether we have an agreement or not later on a Center for Democratic Resilience. Then on Hungary, so we are 32 NATO allies, and we all have the same status within the alliance, and we have all signed to the Washington Treaty, the Collective Defense Clause, our commitment to protect and defend each other, and that we make decisions together by consensus. Then, of course, sometimes allies have specific concerns, and we have a long tradition in NATO to find pragmatic ways to address those specific concerns without undermining the unity and undermining the commitment we all have to protect and defend each other. So whatever the concerns may be, I'm confident that we'll find ways to address those without undermining the core responsibility of all allies to protect and defend each other, and the commitment to all the provisions within the Washington Treaty. Then Italy. Well, first of all, I established the expert group on the South to ensure that we had the proposals on the table for what more NATO can do. We are now discussing them, and of course, at the end of the day, I will be dependent on the support from allies to get the mandate to do more. I think we can do more, but then we need a firm decision, and we need the resources to do so. But let me just briefly also remind you of the fact that NATO already has a presence in the South. We have the training mission in Iraq, which is absolutely relevant for the South. We have actually, over the last years, increased that based on requests from the Iraqi government to help them stabilize their country, to fight terrorism, to ensure that ISIS does not return. We have a partnership program. We work with Jordan in many different areas, and we have just agreed to establish a liaison office in Amman. And of course, Jordan is a country which is important in the wider Middle East region, and King Abdullah has visited the NATO headquarters several times, and we are stepping up what we do together with Jordan. And then we have partners like Mauritania, where we have a partnership program. We have Tunisia. We have important activities helping to build their defense and security institutions, but I strongly believe that we could scale up. And the reason why we're not scaling up more is actually very much a lack of resources. And again, I'm back to allies that need to allocate the necessary resources to be able to do more in those areas. Then last December, I visited Saudi Arabia, Riyadh, as the first NATO Secretary General, and I think that the Gulf countries are important. Many of them are our partners, but regardless of whether they are partners or not, we can engage with them, discuss with them to address global challenges, and the security in that region also matters for NATO. So I will very much like, yeah, and then the last thing I will mention is that we also have a NATO presence in the GNC, helping to enforce and monitor the agreement between Turkey, a NATO ally, and Greece, Frontex, EU, on illegal migration. And I think that also demonstrates how NATO can be a platform between NATO allies inside and outside the European Union in addressing common challenges. So NATO has a role to play. We do a lot, but I significantly believe we can do more. And I think the report we have received is an excellent platform to actually make decisions to step up what to do together in the south.
Thank you. Now the next group will start with Mevlut Cavusoglu from, then Raimond Kaljulent from Estonia, and Roman Hryszczuk from Ukraine. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. On behalf of Turkish delegation, I would like to extend our sincere thanks and appreciation to Secretary General Stoltenberg. NATO indeed passed through challenging times during his tenure, but without doubt, we navigated safely through these challenges thanks to his commendable leadership. He led us with his experience, but also with his wisdom. His excellent communication with all allies took everyone on board, even against the most delicate issues, and ensured trust and solidarity among the allies. His support and hard work in guiding us to make NATO stronger deserves praise. I personally had the pleasure to work closely with him in many fields, the most recent being the latest enlargement process. And his balanced and attentive approach always helped us all to find the best way forward. Jens, my dear friend, your leadership throughout the last 10 years, particularly after the earthquakes in Turkey, is still fresh in our memories. Once again, thank you, and I wish you all the best for the future.
Yes, thank you. Can I speak or?
The floor is yours, Raimond.
Thank you. Mr. Secretary General, thank you very much for your service from Estonia. And I want to say our delegation very much welcomes the comments you made to The Economist on getting rid of some of the restrictions that have been placed on using weapons against Russian territory. But I would like to ask you to clarify your stance perhaps on what you said about possibly using troops or providing air defense from some of the neighboring countries to Ukraine. You've said it here today as well that you think that this will lead to or might lead to an escalation or a war between Russia and NATO. And I would like to ask you that in the 75 years of NATO, this has happened repeatedly, that countries have intervened in conflicts. Most recently, it was done with Iranian missiles that were directed against Israel, and it did not lead to, for instance, war between NATO and Iran at this time. So how is the situation different right now, and why do you think that this time it would necessarily lead to escalation? Thank you very much.
Roman, please, from Ukraine.
Mr. Secretary General, thank you so much for what you did and what you do for my country, especially for your strong position on lifting the restriction of use of weapons by Ukraine to protect our territory and civilian. It's, as you mentioned, self-defense. Since the beginning of Russian invasion in Ukraine, the alliance promised that it will stay by Ukraine as long as it takes. As the top officials of NATO, how do you assess the support provided to UA so far? Do you believe that NATO did sufficiently to help Ukraine to win? And finally, what still should be done by NATO for my country in terms of both military help and advancing UAE aspiration to join NATO? Thank you.
Thank you so much. First to Mr. Mevlut Cavusoglu. Also, dear Mevlut, thank you for your kind words. It has been a real privilege to working with you, and thank you for everything you have done for this alliance, because you have actually helped to overcome some of the most difficult issues to enable compromise and to also find a way forward on enlargement. So thank you for that, and I hope that we can find ways to stay in touch also in the future. So I'm looking forward to continue to work with you in different capacities. So thank you so much, Mevlut. Then to Estonia. Well, also I accept that the issues are not always easy, but I strongly believe and continue to believe that the way to mobilize continued and also increased support from NATO allies to Ukraine is also to communicate to our own publics that we do that in a way that doesn't make NATO a party to the conflict. Because there is a strong majority across the alliance for support to Ukraine. But there are not many allies which are prepared to go into a full-fledged conflict between NATO and Russia. And therefore I think that the way to ensure continued support for Ukraine is to find this way of supporting Ukraine without making NATO directly involved. Because if that's the question, I think we will really undermine the unity in providing support to Ukraine. So if you are concerned about support to Ukraine, it is actually very important that we find ways to do that which enable us to do it as 32 allies with unity for long term, with broad public support. So therefore, I'm just think that the more you are supportive of Ukraine, the more cautious you should be, or we should be, to actually ask for things that can divide us. We have unity in providing support. We will not have unity in being directly involved. And if we have NATO forces directly involved in the conflict, attacking Russian capabilities in the air or on land in Ukraine, then we will be in a situation where it's very hard to keep NATO out of the conflict. And that's the reason why what I strongly believe is that we should do significantly more in providing support to Ukraine. And I outlined a multi-year financial pledge. I outlined a stronger NATO role in coordinating, providing training, equipment, ammunition to avoid those pauses in the supplies we have seen over the last months. But also why I am also stated that we should not have NATO troops on the ground or capabilities in the air, also in the Ukrainian airspace. But I also believe that when we have delivered weapons to Ukraine, it's actually not ours anymore, it's Ukrainians. And as I've said, they have the right to self-defense. And the right of self-defense includes also hitting legitimate military targets outside Ukraine and also in Russia, which are, air bases which Russia uses to attack. And again, also in the Kharkiv region, Bulgarod, this border region, it is the border lines and the front lines are not exactly the same, but they're very close to each other. So then it's very clearly operational reasons to actually allow the Ukrainians to also use these weapons to attack military Russian targets, which are hitting Ukraine. So I accept that there are different views, but I think that the balance we have been able to find within the alliance has been and continues to be the right one. Support Ukraine, but preventing escalation, prevent NATO from being a party to the conflict. Then on Ukraine, NATO allies should do more. We have done a lot. Russia, President Putin totally underestimated, first of all, he underestimated the Ukrainians. There's the strength, the bravery, the willingness to defend themselves. But he also underestimated NATO allies and our ability to support Ukraine. So we should be proud of what we have provided. And allies in this assembly, you should be proud of the support you have provided. But what we have provided is not enough, especially not the last months. So therefore, we need to do more. We need to step up. And I also believe that the reason why we need some kind of agreed financial pledge is to ensure a fairer burden sharing. Because the reality is that some allies have done very much, Other allies have done, I should say, not as much as they should. There are also some problems with accountability and transparency on what exactly allies have provided. So if you have a more agreed financial pledge and a bigger NATO role, I think we can have more accountability, more transparency on actually what allies are providing to ensure fairer burden sharing. And by having fairer burden sharing, I think it will be easier to continue this support for long haul. No one can say exactly how long this war will last, but we need to be prepared for long haul. And therefore we need to have the institutions, the mechanisms in place, including long-term financial pledge and a stronger NATO role to ensure that we can sustain this for the long time. Then on NATO and membership, allies agree that Ukraine will become a member, but we don't have consensus on exactly when that will be. In the meantime, I think the important thing is that we put Ukraine and help to ensure that Ukraine will be in a place that when the political conditions are in place, that Ukraine can become a member immediately. I know that Ukraine and Sweden and Finland are different countries, but in many ways I would like to have Ukraine exactly in the same place as Finland and Sweden. Because when the political conditions were in place, when actually Finland and Sweden wanted membership in May 2022, they applied on the 17th of May for membership, and in July all allies agreed to invite them, and just a couple of weeks after we have negotiated the accession treaty. So we should be in the same place with Ukraine, and that's the reason why I welcome everything we do to ensure full interoperability. We have the interoperability program for Ukraine. That's one of the reasons why I would like to have a stronger NATO role in providing assistance, because then we also ensure that we have the standards, the interoperability in Ukraine when we provide support for Ukraine. And also I welcome the establishment of the NATO-Ukraine Council, which we now use as a platform to strengthen our political ties. And also I welcome the decision at the Vilnius Summit last year to remove the requirement for a membership action plan, turning the membership process for Ukraine from a two-step process to a one-step process. So as long as we don't have consensus, we should ensure that we put Ukraine in a place so that they can become members immediately when the conditions are met.
Thank you. Now, unfortunately, the last final group. Michal Friobertsson from Iceland, Mr. Andronius Azobalis from Lithuania, and Mimi Kondeli from Albania.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. Good to see you here in Sofia, Mr. Secretary General. Our Science and Technology Committee is developing a report on China's challenge to NATO's technological edge and the role of semiconductors, which I had the pleasure to draft as a general rapporteur. As NATO's Vilnius Summit communique recognizes, emerging and disruptive technology brings both opportunities and risk. They are altering the character of conflict, acquiring greater strategic importance, and becoming key arenas of global competition. ETTs are influencing varied areas of security and defense, amongst them satellite deployment, which is crucial to allow real-time detection and monitoring of activity in strategic areas, including in the high north. The full-scale invasion of Ukraine has had a great ramification for relations in the high north, and the accession of both Sweden and Finland to NATO might affect Russia's calculus and possible responses in the region. Therefore, my question is, how can we ensure that NATO keeps its technological edge, including in surveillance and satellite deployment, and thus its capacity to strengthen security in the high north?
Andronius.
Thank you, Mr. President. Secretary General, how we members of NATO could expect Ukraine's victory if we haven't developed a strategy regarding NATO support for Ukraine against aggression by the Russian Federation at tactical, operational, and strategic levels?
We know that such a request about strategic plan for victory to the United States administration was sent from the Congress, but that is not happening in NATO. Could you comment on that? Thank you.
Thank you. Dear Secretary General, dear Jens, on behalf of the Albanian delegation, I would like to show you my gratitude for your outstanding leadership, open-mindedness, goodwill, and wise solutions you show in your 10 years serving our organization. Personally, I have been working with you since then, since the beginning, in different capacities. And we're still here, you know, taking care of our future, safe and secure future. So I'm here to reassure you and my organization, the NATO PA, that Albania, it has been and will be one of the best alliances of the big alliance, because we are sure that only this alliance can save the future of our kids. So thank you again.
Thank you so much. Let me start with the last comment question. Dear Mimi, it has been a pleasure to work with you too in your capacity as minister, but also now in the NATO Parliamentary Assembly. And there are many faces around in this audience that I know from over many years, and it's always great to see you, and all the best for the future, and hope to see you again in the future in different capacities. Then let me start with Iceland. Well, NATO is the strongest alliance, I said at the beginning, for two reasons: for our unity and because we have been able to adapt. There is actually a third reason, and that is that we have been able to maintain a technological edge on any potential adversary. And that's extremely important that we continue to do. And now, in times of disruptive technologies, we see how not least China are investing in also in quantum computing, artificial intelligence, and many other of these technologies, which will change the nature of warfare as much as the Industrial Revolution. And then, of course, it is important that we continue to ensure that we maintain our technological edge with the development of autonomous systems, applying artificial intelligence into our capabilities and many other areas. To ensure exactly that, we have established the NATO Innovation Fund, and many allies have already invested there. We are working to promote startups, to help new industries being developed to support our defense efforts. We have also established Diana, this network of centers which are developing different technologies, helping to work again with startups. And I'm impressed how NATO allies are actually using these NATO tools to ensure that we develop technology, businesses, industries, which are important for our defense. And I think what the war in Ukraine has demonstrated is that we will not have any defense without a defense industry. And we will not have any advanced defense without advanced defense industries. Therefore, part of what we do is also work with the defense industry. We have the NATO Defense Industry Forum. We engage regularly with them. And one of the reasons why we need to increase defense spending, is that when we invest in new capabilities, we are also investing in new technologies. So this is, we are investing more partly to just produce more of the old stuff. Sometimes we need that. But by investing more in new fighter jets, in new battle tanks, in new cyber capabilities, we are at the same time investing in high-end technology. So increased investments are a precondition for maintaining our technological edge. We have a responsibility as individual allies, but we also should utilize the NATO tools, the different Center of Excellences, the Innovation Fund, Diana, to ensure that we actually help and support each other in those efforts. Then on Lithuania, so we are constantly in close dialogue with the Ukrainian authorities. There are, as you also know, close contact between NATO military authorities, also, or for instance the US, which is then also, of course, also, for instance, General Cavoli, he is the top US commander in Europe, and he and his staff, they are engaging with the Ukrainians counterparts, but of course General Cavoli is also the top NATO commander in Europe, and when we foresee a greater NATO role in providing support and assistance, we also see that some of these things which are now been done under the US-led effort in Ramstein, for instance, no, not mainly in Wiesbaden, the SAGU, the Support Assistance Group, the Security Assistance Group for Ukraine in Wiesbaden, that some of those activities will be under a NATO umbrella. That will then make it even easier to ensure that we have full coordination between what an individual ally as the United States does and what we do as NATO. So we are working closely with, and my aim is to ensure that we work even more closely with Ukraine in the future to ensure that they prevail as a sovereign independent nation. Of course, Ukraine has to make the decisions, but we can give them the capabilities, we can give them the long-term commitment, and we can help and give advice, but it's for the Ukrainians to, at the end of the day, make the decisions. So they prevail and ensure that Russia does not succeed. I think that was actually the last question. Again, many questions. Thank you for very relevant questions. I'm sorry that not everyone was able to ask a question, but the problem is not the number of questions. The problem is that the length of the answers are too long. So excuse me so much, but I thank you very much for all the questions, for the support, for the cooperation, and it's been really a privilege and honor to work with you, and I wish you all the best in the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. That concludes our questions. Thank you, Secretary General, for your time and for your informative answers to our questions. In just 43 days, we will meet in Washington for a critical summit. We must demonstrate absolute unity and determination. Now we have reached a break in our proceeding. Coffee will be served outside the hall, and I will restart the session at 10:55 sharp for the address by Kerstin LUNDGREN, Deputy Speaker of Riksdag of Sweden. Have a nice break.
So, dear colleagues, we are a little bit in a hurry, so please take your seats. Okay, dear colleagues, please have a seat. We're going to start our session now. So, welcome back from coffee break. It is now my pleasure to welcome Kerstin LUNDGREN, third Deputy Speaker of the Riksdag of Sweden. On behalf of all of NATO Parliamentary Assembly, I want to say how glad we are that Sweden is now a member of this assembly. We are delighted that you have joined us today on behalf of the Speaker of the Riksdag of Sweden to mark this historic milestone. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members of the NATO Parliamentary Assembly, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I'm honored as Deputy Speaker to have this opportunity to address the NATO Parliamentary Assembly on behalf of the Speaker of the Swedish Parliament at a very special time in the life of my country, of the Alliance, and of the whole world. The Speaker is unfortunately unable to attend, but he greets you all. We are meeting today in times of great trouble, times of large-scale war in Europe. Russia's brutal aggression towards Ukraine is not only an attack on their citizens, their independence, and on democracy, but also on the European security order. It is difficult to imagine a place better suited for a meeting such as this than Sofia, the capital of a country that for more than 1,000 years had stood up to surrounding empires in defense of the right of the nation to choose its own destiny. From a Swedish perspective, the war has had profound ramifications for our security policy. Less than 3 months after Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine, the Swedish government, with broad support from the Parliament, as well as the public, submitted an application for NATO membership. This decision ended our country's centuries of military non-alignment. Sweden as a nation began to emerge from the fog of history around the year 1000. During the millennium that has passed since then, we have had various allies from whom we have been promised support and who have promised to support us in the event of war. But we have never had so many and such close allies as we have today. We are now part of an alliance with 32 countries that have committed to come to each other's aid and assistance. This is unique, not only in our country, or our country's 1,000 years history, but also in our continent's history. Our Europe, a continent that has been marked over the centuries more by war and conflict than by peaceful coexistence, is now to a great extent bound together by a defense alliance and by European Union. Never before have so many of Europe's countries collaborated so closely and in so many ways. Furthermore, we have the transatlantic cooperation, which of course is a cornerstone in our cooperation within NATO, but which is also extensive in many other areas. After discussions with the parties in the Swedish Parliament and consultation in the Advisory Council on Foreign Affairs, the government, led by Prime Minister Magdalena Andersson, decided in May 2022 that Sweden would apply for membership of NATO. The current Swedish government, led by Prime Minister Ulf Kristersson, took over the process following the change of government in October 22. On 22nd of March 2023, the Swedish Parliament voted by broad majority to approve Sweden's accession to the North Atlantic Treaty and the agreement on the status of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO. Sweden initiated its membership process in close consultation with Finland. Our countries are not just neighbors, we also have a largely shared history and very close ties at many levels. These ties have been forged even tighter over the past 2 years. During the process, we have also felt a great deal of support for the Swedish application from fellow speakers and members of parliaments in various NATO countries. For this, we are very grateful, and Sweden is also grateful for the security guarantees which some countries issued. I see in many places in my country a strong will to contribute to a positive fellowship built on shared values, a strong will to be an active ally that contributes to the defense of freedom and democracy in the whole of Europe, and a strong will to contribute to an alliance that continues to support Ukraine for as long as it takes. This is how Sweden chooses to meet the threats and challenges that mark our world. Sweden's membership of NATO may be new, but our cooperation is not. Our country has been part of the Partnership for Peace for 3 decades. We have participated in a number of NATO-led international missions. Several military exercises with participating NATO countries have also taken place in Sweden. And the Swedish Parliament became an associated member of this assembly as early as 2003. Late, perhaps you think, but for us it was early. More than 20 years ago. The Swedish delegation has since then endeavored to be an active and a reliable partner, and it is my hope that we, through Sweden's membership of NATO, will be able to play a more active role. Our ambition to be an active and a reliable partner to both the NATO Parliamentary Assembly and NATO, we intend to become actively engaged to all of NATO's core activities: deterrence and collective defense, crisis management, and security cooperation. With Sweden's accession of the Baltic Sea countries, with the exception of the aggressor Russia, are members of NATO. We can contribute with a strong Swedish defense capability and a strong Swedish defense industry. This year, as mentioned before, our defense expenditure exceeds 2% of GDP, and the proposed way forward goes to 2.6% for 2028. Our defense industry has technological expertise. We look forward to deeper cooperation with all of the alliance members. Ladies and gentlemen, the Speaker of the Swedish Parliament have in the strongest terms condemned Russia's brutal invasion of Ukraine. And the support for Ukraine in our Parliament is united and solid. Many speculated that our commitment to the Ukrainian cause would subside as time passed. But what I see is not diminishing commitment, but a growing insight into the fact that the war is about something more than Ukraine's freedom. Our support for Ukraine is not only a fight to help Ukraine, it's a fight for democracy and human rights throughout Europe. It is therefore vital that we provide Ukraine with the support it needs to take back the occupied parts of its country. In the light of the current state of the world, with Russia's brutal assault on the people of Ukraine, we are reminded of the fact that advocacy for democracy is more important than ever. Liberty, democracy, human dignity, these are forces far more powerful than fear and oppression. Russia's aggression entails challenges to our country and our region, and I wish to stress the importance of parliaments that safeguard and protect democracy and international law. Our parliaments are simply the foremost symbol of democracy, but they should also be the foremost champions and defenders of democracy. It is my firm belief that the best way in which we as parliamentarians can promote peace and international security is to stand up for democracy, human rights, and a rules-based world order. Democracy is a prerequisite for peace, security, and prosperity. In these troubled times, we have been reminded of the importance of parliamentary cooperation, solidarity, and joint efforts to promote peace and democracy. In the face of this, democratic and parliamentary assignments are becoming increasingly important. As representatives of our parliaments and our democratic systems, we should work together and support each other in upholding and strengthening our democratic processes. I strongly believe in the ability of parliamentary assemblies, like the one that is gathered here today, to strengthen the ties between parliaments, united by common values and objectives. Ladies and gentlemen, the Ukrainian people have shown the world that they are determined to defend their independence. This show of resolve has been an inspiration to all of us. The times we are experiencing might seem dark, but they are not devoid of hope. The hope is to be found in the steadfast willingness to defend freedom and in the support that those carrying out this struggle are receiving. This hope is strengthened by the perseverance showed both by those risking their lives in the fight for freedom and those providing support that is vital for their ability to continue fighting. Thank you all.
Madam Deputy Speaker, thank you for your remarks and for coming to speak to us today. So it is now my pleasure to introduce a video address by His Excellency Mr. Volodymyr Zelensky, President of Ukraine.
For them, it is a pleasure to burn. We all know who are we dealing with. Russia is run by men who want to make it a norm, burning lives, destroying cities and villages, dividing people and erasing national borders through war. There is no nation that can stop such war alone. Unaided world leaders' engagement is needed. I'm now in Kharkiv, a city in the east of Ukraine, and unfortunately very close to the border on Russia. What does it mean for Kharkiv? A third year of constant terror. More than 1 million of people in this city. And every night and every day, Russian army is shelling the city, mostly with S-300 missiles. These are air defense missiles which Russia employs to terrorize the land. There is not a single district or street in the Kharkiv that hasn't suffered from this regular cruelty. Russia added strikes with guided aerial bombs. Russian aviation comes close to our state border and launches these bombs straight on the city. It is a weapon of indiscriminate destruction. And anyone in any city of the world, from Sao Paulo to Harbin, take this the same way as terror. Just like all other Russian strikes on hundreds of other of our cities and villages. Some of them, once booming with life, are now burned to ashes, people less. A burnt out emptiness, the most horrible consequence of war. War that we didn't want in Ukraine, that we haven't provoked, and in which Ukraine is defending itself from Russian attempts to seize our resources and territories and destroy our national identity. And the world sees it. Behind me are the books burned down by Russian missiles. It was one of the largest publishing houses in Ukraine. People got injured here. Unfortunately, there are people killed. Temperature of burning here hasn't managed to totally reach for 451 degrees Fahrenheit. But that's what the leaders of Russia need and want, even higher temperatures. And not only on the sovereign territory of Ukraine, Russia is threatening almost all of its neighbor countries. Russia is the only state that captured the nuclear power plant and is openly using it for radiation blackmail. There is nothing that wouldn't become a weapon for Russia, including hunger. And exactly this the world felt when Ukraine was hit by Russian naval blockade. Russia is the only source of aggression and constantly tries to expand the war. Right now, these days, we are defending ourselves 60 kilometers northeast from this place, from yet another attempt of the Russian assault. Russia is preparing for offensive actions also 90 kilometers northwest from here. They gather another group of troops near our border. The one who does all this doesn't want peace. Does Russia want a dialogue? Ukraine had the world's largest experience of lies from Russian during negotiations. Lies that in particular was Russian cover-up for preparing this war. And that's exactly why global efforts are needed. Global Peace Summit of the leaders whom Russia will not be able to deceive. Summit that will show who in the world really wants to end the war and not just claim the ceasefire, which will inevitably be broken by Russian rockets and artillery, just like as it was dozens of times before. Together with Switzerland, we are preparing such summits. It starts on June 15th. More than 80 countries confirmed they will come. And we continue to work with the leaders, inviting them to join the summit. I thank everyone who really helps to bring the peace. And I am appealing to the leaders of the world who are still aside of the global efforts of the Global Peace Summit. To President Biden, the leader of the United States, and to President Xi, the leader of China, we do not want the UN Charter to be burned down just like these books. And I hope you don't want to either. Please show your leadership in advancing the peace, real peace, not just a pause between the strikes. The efforts of global majority are the best guarantee that all commitments will be fulfilled. Please support the Peace Summit with your personal leadership and participation. For all of us, it should be a pleasure to make peace.
President Zalewski, thank you for your remarks. So it is now my pleasure to introduce a video addressed by His Excellency Mr. Rustem UMEROV, Minister of Defense of Ukraine.
Distinguished Secretary General, distinguished leaders of Bulgaria, distinguished participants and guests. I'm honored to have the opportunity to address this prominent audience today. Full-fledged membership in the alliance is our ultimate goal. NATO means security, and I'm convinced that Ukraine's accession to the alliance will be a mutually beneficial step to further strengthen security in Europe and the world. Dear members of parliaments, as you know, in recent weeks, Russian troops started invasion through state border in Kharkiv Oblast, intensifying its offensive in several border Ukrainian villages. Disregarding the huge losses they are pushing with tanks, armored personnel carriers, and infantry waves. Thanks to the courage of our military, we have been able to hold back these attacks. It's very difficult for us because we lack weapons. We're particularly short of artillery shells and defense systems. Russia is trying to destroy everything it cannot capture, continues to kill and terrorize civilians, innocent people. Just one example to quote. Last week, a missile strike destroyed one of Ukraine's largest printing plants. 7 people were killed and 21 others were injured. Tens of thousands of books, textbooks, and children's literature were burned. Russian terror must be stopped. To do this, we need your determination. We need more anti-aircraft weapons, more long-range capabilities for our soldiers. I ask you to contribute to the adoption of these decisions as much as possible. Ladies and gentlemen, you'll also have known of the serious damage that Russian air attacks have caused to our power infrastructure. I have to emphasize that these Russian attacks on our energy facilities also pose a threat to Ukraine's neighboring countries. The Russian aggressors have repeatedly launched missiles and drones in provocative manners and in dangerous proximity to our western borders, and even crossed them. It's only a matter of time when they cross that line again. That is why I call on neighboring NATO member states that cannot provide us with their air defense systems to find ways to close the skies over our western regions from their territory. Dear participants of the forum, to strengthen our defense capabilities, we are intensifying our mobilization processes. We have improved our legislation. The main amendments in the adopted laws are lowering the conscription age to 25 years, clearly defining the powers of local governments and digitalizing conscription processes. We support the position of NATO members, France and Baltic states on the possibility of involving the military of partner countries in operations on the territory of Ukraine. I welcome the initiative to bring foreign instructors back to Ukraine to train our military, which will save valuable time and effort and streamline the logistics. Ladies and gentlemen, as I have already mentioned, future membership in NATO is a priority for us. To this end, we're working closely with NATO experts to achieve tangible results by NATO Washington Summit in July this year. I'm grateful to all of you for your unwavering support for Ukraine. This support is important not only for our security and stability, but also for ensuring that the principles of international law and order shall be upheld in the future. Together to victory. Slava Ukraini!
Minister, thank you for your remarks. I invite now my colleague Marcos Perestrello to take over the chair of the session from me.
Thank you, Nico. Good morning to all colleagues. We come now to the draft declarations. There are 2 texts in total. After each draft declaration has been presented, I propose the time limit of 1 minute for other speakers and for anyone presenting amendments. The first draft declaration is the declaration on shaping NATO for the next generations at the Washington Summit. And I call Mr. Michal, President of NATO Parliamentary Assembly, to present the draft declaration. Michal, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you. I'll try to be in time. Colleague, as I have mentioned, I already mentioned in my address this morning, Allied leaders must send a simple, clear message in Washington. They must transform NATO for the next generation stronger than ever, the guarantor of our security and the defender of our democracy. Our Assembly has a clear vision for the NATO future. As I said, NATO must be an alliance of democracies, determined to defend every inch of Allied territory, stay committed to standing with Ukraine until victory, and fairly shares the benefits and the responsibilities. An alliance which welcomes those who share our values. This is the vision at the heart of this declaration. To achieve it, the Washington Summit must finally task the creation of Center for Democratic Resilience at NATO headquarters, fully implement NATO enhanced deterrence and defense posture, ensure NATO's new defense plans can be executed if needed, urgently strengthen allied defense industries and production, call on all allies to spend at least 2% of GDP on defense without delay. 2% is the absolute minimum. In certain cases, substantially higher spending will be necessary. The summit should also adopt a burden-sharing pledge and task the preparation of a strategy of modern containment of Russia. This is our vision. This is our recommendations. I count on your support. Thank you.
Thank you, Michal. We don't have, does anyone wants to speak in general of the draft, about the draft declaration? I don't see anyone asking for the floor. So we will vote now on the draft declaration on shaping NATO for the next generations at the Washington Summit. All those in favor, please raise your voting cards. Thank you. Those against? Those against, who are they? I can see them. Who are they? Okay, thank you. Abstentions? The resolution was approved with 2 votes against.
Thank you.
We now come to the draft declaration on standing with Ukraine until victory. Amendments have been tabled to the draft declaration. The text of the amendments is available outside the hall and it was given to all delegates. I call Michal, President of the NATO Parliamentary Assembly, to present the draft declaration. Michal, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Dear colleagues, we must adopt a Ukraine declaration that speaks with clarity and determination. The Ukrainian people prove every day that democracy is resilient, but they are at a very difficult and critical moment. Russia has intensified its campaign across the board. We can no longer afford to impose artificial delays or red lines. As I made clear this morning, we must urgently help Ukraine. Give everything we can. Our simple vision is Ukraine's victory and Russia's strategic defeat in Ukraine. For Ukraine's sake, for the sake of our own security, for the sake of democracy. But to achieve this vision, we need to do more. Allies must urgently step up and speed up the delivery of military assistance with air defense an urgent priority. NATO must continue to strengthen its own assistance, agree ambitious funding, establish a NATO mission for Ukraine and adopt an interoperability roadmap. The NATO-Ukraine Joint Analysis, Training and Educational Center in Budapest must be established as soon as possible as a separate NATO's body and allocating sufficient NATO funds. I had a talk with Secretary General just a few minutes ago on this. Both the NATO-Ukraine Council and the NATO representation in Ukraine must be further strengthened and work more closely with the Assembly. All allies must also increase defense production, give priority to Ukraine's orders and support development of Ukraine's defense industrial capacity. Last but not least, we must make Ukraine's path to NATO membership irreversible. NATO must recognize that Ukraine has made significant progress towards an invitation to join NATO, and in Washington, allies must accelerate its integration through concrete, significant, and tangible steps forward. Dear friends, the security of Europe today is being decided in Ukraine. So with this declaration, we continue to fulfill our duty. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. We now go straight to the amendments to the draft declaration on standing with Ukraine until victory. The first amendment is presented by Mr. Chernev from Ukraine, and it will add the words, after the words against Ukraine in the first paragraph, he suggests that we delete the word and that we insert as well as its missile and drone. So the first paragraph will have the new read, reiterating its unequivocal condemnation in the strongest possible terms of Russia's ongoing war of aggression against Ukraine, as well as its missile and drone attacks against urban centers and critical infrastructure aimed at terrorizing the Ukrainian people. Does anyone want to speak about this amendment? Nobody's asking the floor, so I propose we vote the amendment. All those in favor of the amendment? Thank you. Those against the amendment? Abstaining? The amendment was approved by unanimity. Amendment number 1, presented by Mr. Cheva from Poland. After paragraph 13, insert the following new paragraph. Applauding the substantial assistance for Ukraine in the amount of $16.8 billion
recently approved by the United States that demonstrates the powerful US commitment to Ukraine. Does anyone want to speak about this amendment? Nobody is asking for the floor, so we'll pass to vote. All those in favor of the amendment? Thank you. Against? Abstention? The amendment was approved by unanimity. The third and fourth amendment are both presented by Mr. Chernev from Ukraine, and is asking to add after paragraph 27, a paragraph 27b, inserting the following new sub-paragraph. To use all available opportunities to provide Ukraine with the required number of air defense systems, primarily Patriot, to protect civilian objects. Does anyone want to speak about this amendment? So we vote. Amendment number 3, to insert after in paragraph 27, a paragraph 27b. All those in favor? Thank you. All those against? Abstention? Thank you. The amendment was approved with 3 abstentions. Amendment number 4, also for Mr. Chernev, to insert a new paragraph after 27b. To approve the decision to allow Ukraine to use weapons provided by partners to strike legitimate military targets on the territory of Russia. All those in favor? Oh, sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry. Anyone wants to speak about this? Julie?
From Canada, thank you. I wonder whether our Ukrainian friends would find this a friendly amendment. I want to use the words of our Secretary General this morning, and whether they would be okay with the following, which is basically the same, I'm just strengthening it, I think, to support Ukraine in their international right to defend itself by lifting some restrictions on the use of weapons provided by NATO partners and strike legitimate targets on the territory of Russia. I wanted to see whether Ukraine would find that a friendly amendment.
Okay, thank you, Julie. Mr. Formentini from Italy.
I speak Italian.
I would have wanted to take the floor earlier when Secretary General Stoltenberg was here, but it wasn't possible due to time constraints. The position expressed by our Deputy Prime Minister, Mr. Salvini, by the entire Italian government on this topic is very clear. We have sent all of the military aid to Ukraine with one specific condition, that they would not be used against Russia's territory. Therefore, it's surprising that the Secretary General stated this position twice during this assembly. We believe in NATO, we believe in its unity, and therefore these decisions have to be discussed among member states prior to these discussions. Thank you.
Does anyone else want to speak? I would, yes, please, Lord Hamilton from the UK.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think we've got to recognise that Ukraine is losing this war at the moment, and we've got to up the game. So we can't go on saying, well, it's no good having missiles that can fire into Russia. They've been happily firing missiles into Kiev, and I don't see any reason why we shouldn't retaliate. And I think it would be very sad if we didn't pass this amendment.
Thank you. Andronius Asubalish from...
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a few minutes ago, we all saw the touchy and tragic video applied from the Ukrainian President Zelensky. We saw the publishing house, which is under the fire, and the civilian objects. And that's why military support to Ukraine and its limited use, to put it mildly, it seems hypocritical. To say like least, it's like playing basketball with handcuffs. Thank you.
Thank you. Philippe Folliot from France.
Philippe. Thank you very much. I just wanted to recall that in this war, Ukraine only claims its legitimate right to self-defense, and that so far, in the use of the weaponry, Ukraine has scrupulously respected the demands and caveats of those nations that donated weapons and equipment to Ukraine. If Ukraine has at all times respected the rules of the international order, Putin has no limit and pushes the boundaries further and further. And faced with that, the Ukrainian amendment, amended again by the Canadian delegation, seems to me to be a very good compromise indeed. Thank you, Philip.
Thank you very much. I think it's absolutely vital that these restrictions will be lifted if you look at the situation on the ground and on the front right now in Ukraine. And I would like to also very much welcome the letter that was signed by members of the US delegation, also calling for the US administration to lift those restrictions. And I would urge all members to think of it this way. Imagine it is your country that is being shelled and struck by missiles that are fired from outside of your borders. Would you not want to have the possibility to fire back and destroy these rocket launchers and missile launchers and the troops that operate them? I'm certain that any country represented here would absolutely feel that it is in their right to do so and would want to have that right. So I think we should support that most definitely. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Raymond. Jan Paternot from the...
Thank you very much, Mr. President. We are asking Ukraine currently to fight with one hand behind their backs. And Russia, I'd like to point out, is taking full advantage of that by amassing troops and equipment right across the border. We cannot ask the Ukrainians to be sitting ducks in a war that they are also fighting for our security. So we need to lift that restriction, and we support both the amendment and the compromise issued by Canada.
Thank you, Jan. Hans Swarmat from Sweden.
Thank you. I really appreciated how clear Mr. Stoltenberg was here at the summit. And Sweden has no restrictions or caveats on the donation of weapons and arms to Ukraine. So we are totally in line with this. I think that Sweden is supporting the Canadian proposal, and I hope that also Ukraine can accept that. I think that it's a good phrasing. So thank you.
Thank you, Hans. Michal Szczerba.
I fully support this amendment from our colleagues from Ukraine, and I find Julie's proposal as added value to this amendment. And if the author of the amendment, Yehor Cherniev, and his delegation agrees, I would like to support this. We must not set red lines, especially if Russia hides behind these red lines to attack peaceful cities like Kharkiv every day. The time for half measures is over. We must 100% support Ukraine. So this is what I want you to know, and I fully support this amendment created now by both Yehor and Julie.
Thank you, Michal. I received the information. Mr. Cherniev, please.
Well, dear friend, thank you for your support, who give us this support. This is really important for us. It's like to fight with the one hand tied behind your back. And you saw this situation near Kharkiv, when we unfortunately couldn't prevent this attack, but we had the information about the assembling the troops near the border. We had the information about their equipment near the border, but we couldn't strike to prevent this attack. And it led to our losses of our soldiers, losses of our civilians, and occupation of our territory near Kharkiv, near border. So we're asking to lift this restriction and to give us the permission to use this weapon against legitimate military targets on the territory of Russia. Thank you, and we agree with the proposal of Canadian delegation. Julie, thank you.
Thank you, Yehor. Okay, then we will vote. Nobody wants to...
Could you just...
Yes. We will vote the amendment proposed by Mr. Chernev in the redaction proposed by Julie from Canada, with the following... Who is asking for... Mr. Cesa from Italy, please.
We were asking the Canadian delegation to repeat their amendment proposal. Thank you.
Going to do it. The amendment, Julie, pay attention because we took note from what you said. Something cannot be right. So we will vote this amendment to support Ukraine in its international right to defend itself by lifting some restrictions on the use of weapons provided by NATO partners to strike legitimate targets in Russia. Okay, can we vote this? All those in favor, please raise the cards. Thank you. All those against? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Abstentions? The amendment was approved with 9 votes against. Congratulations to Mr. Chernev and the Ukrainian delegation. Now we go on amendment number 5, also presented by Mr. Chernev from Ukraine, that suggests that after the words Ukraine defense industrial capacity on paragraph G, we will insert through direct investments into Ukraine's military production. So the paragraph G would have the following text: to ramp up allied defense production for the alliance's needs, as well as to support Ukraine, to work with allied defense industries and with like-minded partners to prioritize aid to Ukraine over orders from other third countries, and to support the urgent development of Ukraine's defense industrial capacity through direct investments into Ukraine's military production. Anyone wants to speak about this amendment? So we'll pass on vote. All those in favor? Against? Abstentions? The amendment was approved with 1 abstention. We pass on the last amendment presented by Mr. Cherba to change paragraph H. And Mr. Cherba suggests that after the words in Bydgoszcz, Poland, insert as a separate NATO body and allocating sufficient NATO funds for its effective functioning. So the paragraph H would have the new reading: to support the prompt establishment of the Joint Analysis, Training and Education Center in Bydgoszcz, Poland, as a separate NATO body and allocating sufficient NATO funds for its effective functioning. Anyone wants to speak about this amendment? Yes. Maya Volers.
Thank you, Marcos.
we as the Germans have one question and remark to make according to the proposal you've just made. Actually, there are ongoing talks at NATO headquarters about the structure of the center in Poland, which we of course support. But because there are still ongoing discussions about the structure and the funding, it's a bit wide from our perspective to support, Michal, your amendment. So I have a different option, but maybe you can accept that. That would be to add after Poland and encourage allies to take a decision on the structure and funding at the Washington summit. Would that be something you could accept?
Thank you, Maya. Anyone else wants to use the floor? Okay, Michal, Chair, you want to answer?
Yes, of course.
Please do.
Training and Education Center in Bydgoszcz in Poland has a very important mandate to provide analytical, educational and training capabilities to jointly identify and apply lessons learned from Russia's war against Ukraine. But to be able to fulfill this mandate, the center should have an adequate legal basis and should receive sufficient funding. Making it a NATO body and allocating NATO funding would help make this center effective and efficient. And that is why my government, Polish government of Donald Tusk, and we propose this language, and I hope you can support this. I also had a bilateral meeting with Jens Stoltenberg, and we discussed this issue, and he supports the idea to making JETEC effective and working for also for Ukraine. So that's why we want this in our declaration on Ukraine, and ask you for the support.
Thank you, Michal. Does anyone else want to? Yes, Philippe Folliot.
Oui, mais... Yes, but concretely, President, do you support the German counter-proposal? Because we find it okay, and we find it very relevant indeed. So would you support that as well, President?
Yeah, Michal, just 1 second. We have another question.
Okay, please.
Okay, Paolo Formentini from Italy. You ask for the floor? No. Okay, Michal.
It was decision announced by 32 ministers and approved by the Secretary General to have JTEC in Bydgoszcz in Poland. But it was announced, but we have to have a chance to work with this effectively, having legal basis and having enough funding. So that's why we put it into this declaration, just to make things happen. So I would like you to support this idea, and it will be, of course, the decision of the NATO. But we are politicians. We present our proposals, recommendations, and that's why this is important to have this in the declaration on Ukraine.
Mike Turner from the US.
We join our French counterparts in supporting the German language that is proposed.
I had a sign from Fernando Gutierrez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to support the amendment as it's presented by the President, by the drafter of the declaration, because at the end of the day we are proposing this. We are parliamentarians. We are proposing this to our governments, and the governments should have to take the final decision, of course. But what we are proposing is to provide the funds, if as it's stated in the initial declaration. Thank you.
Julie is asking for the floor. No. After. Okay. So, Michal, you want to answer?
I'm a compromise builder, so I like Fernando's proposal, and I would like also to react on German proposal. Maybe we can find a solution. So my proposal was to add after the text to support the prompt establishment of the Joint Analysis Training Education Center in Bydgoszcz, Poland, and now it's as a separate NATO body, and allocating sufficient NATO funds for its effective functioning. As I understand, the second part of this sentence, and allocating sufficient NATO funds for its effective funding, it's okay with you? Yes? Johannes?
May I?
And Johannes...
Yes, please.
Yes, may I? Our concerns are, there is no concrete proposal within the NATO structures about how this center should work further on. Nobody's against that center. We're in favor of that. We support that. That is absolutely clear. I say everybody. But to say, but I don't really know, and we have asked our defense ministry whether separate NATO body is the correct naming for that, what should happen there. So let's perhaps politically say that we support it and be not so concrete, because there is we need the defense ministries and the NATO experts work on this. This will function in the end of the day, and we are absolutely supportive to be agreed on this on the NATO summit. But for today, this goes too far in our eyes. This is our very point. Thank you.
Okay.
Do you agree, Michal? It's a reasonable proposal.
I think it's reasonable, but let me to propose to support the prompt establishment of the Joint Analysis Training and Education Center in Bydgoszcz, Poland, and encourage, it's yours proposal, encourage allies to take a decision on structure and funding at the Washington summit. But please, before funding, let's put sufficient NATO funds for its effective functioning. So it could be a compromise from my side. Mike? Oh, sorry. Marcos is sharing.
If I may, I think the problem here is that people are a little taken aback that we're being asked to vote on encouraging NATO to allocate funding. We're not a funding body, and there's certainly many more priorities that we would probably put into a resolution as opposed to this. I agree that with the German, as I understood it, proposal was to allow you to have the vote of the support of this body for the center, but not get into the issue of details. I'm struggling with why we would make a statement with respect to funding, and so that's why I think the proposal by the body has been agreeing that we'd be willing to do a statement in support of the center, but not directing NATO to do any actions with respect to structure and funding.
Thank you, Michal. If I understand, I think we have a reasonable text proposed by the German delegation that, if approved, is enough for the aim you want to achieve with your...
I'm okay with this.
Okay, so I don't have the exact wording of the German text, so I will ask Hans to read it, please.
Sure, I can read it again. So we take the original version under H, and after Poland add and encourage allies to take a decision on the structure and funding at the Washington summit in July.
Thank you, Maya. So we'll vote it. We'll vote amendment number 6, presented by Mr. Cherba, with the text presented by Maya Fullers from Germany. All those in favor? Against? Abstention? Okay, it was approved. The amendment was approved with 1 abstention. Dear colleagues, we need to make a correction on one word of the amendment we approved, amendment number 4, that was proposed by Mr. Cherniev, there was a mistake in the words. We used the word NATO partners, and we wanted to say NATO allies. We all agree on this correction of the wording? Okay, everybody agrees. Yehor. No, it's okay. Yehor Chernev, please.
I would like to offer to delete one word, some, and that's all. Thank you.
Here, we are not reopening the discussion. We're just correcting one word that was against the spirit, okay?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So we go on the vote of the draft declaration on standing with Ukraine until victory, and we will now vote. And all those in favor, please raise your voting cards. Those against? Abstention? Okay, the draft declaration, the declaration was approved with one vote against and one abstention, with a very large and strong majority of the Assembly. Oh, okay, you'll take care of it now. I will now give back the floor to Mr. Cheba.
Okay, let's go to next item, which is associate membership for the Parliament of Malta and for the Assembly of Kosovo. Our next business today concerns approval of the decision of the Standing Committee pursuant to Article 4, Paragraph 1 of the Rules of Procedure concerning associate membership for the Parliament of Malta and for the Assembly of Kosovo. We will now vote on the Standing Committee decision. Does the Assembly approve the recommendation of the Standing Committee that the Parliament of Malta be granted associate membership? Those in favor, please raise your voting cards. Those against? Abstentions? Thank you. Associate membership for the Parliament of Malta is agreed. Nobody was against and no abstention. Thank you. Congratulations, Malta. Now we go to the Assembly of Kosovo. Does the Assembly approve the recommendation of the Standing Committee that the Assembly of Kosovo be granted associate membership? Those in favor, please raise your voting cards. Thank you. Those against? Thank you. Abstentions? Please raise your hands. One against, 14 abstention. Associate membership for the Assembly Kosovo is agreed. Thank you. Congratulations, Assembly of Kosovo. Now we go to the presentation. Okay, I would like ask Marcos to chair this part of the session.
Our next business today concerns amendments to the rules of procedure. And I call Michal, President of NATO Parliamentary Assembly, to introduce the amendments to the rules of procedure. You have the floor, Michal.
Thank you, Marcos. Thank you, Chair. I'm presenting 3 sets of amendments for the Assembly's approval under Article 63.3. First, we must amend our rules to reflect Sweden's accession to NATO on 7th of March 2024. These amendments were approved by the Standing Committee at its meeting in Tallinn in March this year. Second, we must amend the rules to incorporate the position of unique rapporteur, which we created earlier this year as a further step to support our Ukrainian friends. Again, these amendments were approved by the Standing Committee at its meeting in Tallinn. Both of these sets of amendments would come into effect immediately if adopted. The third set of amendments relates to the comprehensive reform of our categories and statuses of non-member delegations, which the Standing Committee adopted at this meeting in March 2024 in Tallinn. Two non-member categories, partner and observer, will replace the existing categories: associate membership, European Parliament, regional partner, and Mediterranean associate membership, parliamentary observer. In addition, two new statuses will be created: NATO inventee and NATO candidate, which will bestow special privileges. These privileges are being applied already. The option of allowing attendance of certain non-member parliaments or interparliamentary bodies to a limited number of activities as ad hoc parliamentary guest is preserved. The new categories will only become effective once the Standing Committee has received relation with non-member delegations and has taken decision on where each non-member delegation fits. The amendments to our rules would become effective then. Thank you.
Thank you, Michal. Does anyone wish to speak? Okay, so we can go for the voting. And we will now vote on the amendments to the rules of procedure. Those in favor, please raise your voting cards. Someone is smiling. Thank you. Those against? Abstentions? The amendment to the rules of procedure are agreed. Thank you. Now we go to the presentation and vote on the financial documents. I call Michal Szczerba, President of our Parliamentary Assembly, to introduce the financial documents and the amendments to the financial regulations. Michal, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Dear colleagues, unfortunately, Wolfgang cannot be with us today. He has asked me to brief you on the finances. My duty is to present for adoption by the Assembly the following documents related to 2023. The two audited financial statements for 2023 and the Treasurer's report on the 2023 surplus. The Standing Committee approved these documents during the meeting in Tallinn on the 23rd of March. We closed the 2023 financial year with a surplus of just under 219,050 euros. The Standing Committee agreed that we should use these savings by allocating the surplus to the provision in support of Ukraine. In the last 2 years, we used these provisions for a total amount of about 50,000 euros. By adding the 2023 surplus to Ukraine provisions, we will be able to continue to financially support the Ukrainian members for the upcoming years. Finally, let me thank the Swiss Ministry of Defense and NATO for their continuous financial support. I would like to kindly ask the Assembly to adopt these 2023 financial documents. Wolfgang also prepared amendments to our financial regulation 092 SC 24IE These 4 amendments are necessary to bring our financial regulations in line with the current rules of procedures and practice. This means using the same term as the rules of procedures to refer to annual sessions, reflecting the correct sequence of presentation of financial documents as mentioned in the rules of procedure, correcting the article numbers when the financial regulation refer to the rules of procedure, finally ensuring that the terms used are not gender specific. These amendments were approved by the Standing Committee yesterday morning, and I hope that the Assembly will adopt them today. This is all from my side. Thank you.
Thank you, Michal. Andres from Iceland, please, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you. It's bad that Wolfgang isn't here because I would like to carry on the conversation we've been having through these meetings for 3 years now regarding the researcher program. I'd like to just highlight the efforts that Wolfgang has made to make that program more attractive to professionals by raising the salaries, and as he's suggesting in one of the papers Michal was presenting, to extend the hiring contract from 9 months up to a year with the possibility of an extension for another year. This is a huge change in the attractiveness of these positions, which will only add to the competency of this body and the professionalism that these individuals bring to the committee work. So I would like to just ask the Secretariat to convey thanks to Wolfgang and also take some of that thanks on board themselves, because it's work that wouldn't be done without having a strong mandate from the leadership of the Secretariat. You've moved the researcher program from being almost social dumping up to being a good job.
Thank you, Andreas. Does anyone else want to speak? Okay, so we can pass on the voting. We will now vote on the 3 financial documents. Treasurer's report on the allocation of the 2023 surplus and update on the current financial year, a bridge version of audited financial statements 2023, and audited financial statements on the Provident Fund 2023. In addition, we will vote on the amendments to the financial regulations, which we'll take together with the 3 financial documents. All those in favor, please raise your cards. Thank you. Those against? Okay. Abstention? Okay. The financial documents and amendments to the financial regulation are agreed. Thank you. I'll pass on Michal.
So that concludes our businesses here today. On behalf of the Parliamentary Assembly, I want to thank Mr. Daniel Mitov. Thank you, Daniel, head of the Bulgarian delegation, for hosting this important and successful session. I also express our gratitude to the staff of the National Assembly of Bulgaria, the International Secretariat, the police and security staff, the interpreters, and all the others who have helped make this session run so smoothly. The Assembly will next convene in Montreal, Canada for the annual session in November 2024. I wanted also to say sorry that some delegation were not able to ask the questions to the Secretary General. It was not my decision. Secretary General had to stop at 10:35, so you were on the list, but unfortunately we will not able to collect your questions. So, thank you very much for these days. Come back to your home safe, and I declare the spring session is closed. Thank you.